My dad called me a parasite at Thanksgiving in front of everyone, so I froze every shared account. There were 16 of us around that table, extended family, close friends, neighbors who'd become relatives in everything but name. The dining room was dressed like a magazine spread, candlelight softening the tension that always lurked at these gatherings, gold-trimmed plates set against a cloth so white it dared gravy to stain it. My mother had orchestrated every detail, right down to the folding of the napkins into the shape of maple leaves. The smell of cinnamon-glazed sweet potatoes and sage-stuffed turkey filled the air, yet none of it could choke down what was coming. He stood with his glass. My father. Not drunk, not even buzzed. Stone-cold sober and sharp-eyed. That smug little tilt to his mouth he wore when he thought he was being clever. He raised his mocktail and turned slowly, scanning the table like some king before his court. Everyone fell silent. "To family," he said, voice steady and clear, "and to my son, our little parasite." The laughter came immediately, not all at once, more like scattered raindrops hitting pavement. Some laughed because they thought they were supposed to. Others laughed because they didn't know what else to do. I even saw Aunt Mara chuckle, and I'd just paid her electric bill last week without her even having to ask. Nobody looked at me. Not directly. Just sideways glances and the clink of glasses. The moment stretched, ugly, awkward, heavy. My own mother's smile faltered but didn't vanish. She looked down at the turkey. My brother Sam, across the table, smirked without bothering to hide it. And why wouldn't he? He'd been on my phone plan for 5 years. I didn't respond. I didn't tell him I'd covered his property tax bill when he forgot to send the check. Didn't remind the table that I'd bought the new HVAC system that kept their house warm. Didn't say that I had been the one quietly refilling the holes his pride wouldn't let him admit existed. I just set down my fork, quietly, didn't throw it, didn't let it clatter for drama. I stood, pulled my chair back with the controlled grace of someone trying not to snap, and I said, "Excuse me." No one stopped me. Not one hand reached out. Not even my mother called my name. By the time I got to my car, I wasn't angry. I was cold. Cold in that clear, deliberate way that isn't about emotion but about mathematics. A reckoning was due. A recalibration of the balance that had long tilted under the weight of entitlement cloaked in family love. I drove home, not fast, not recklessly. The kind of drive where every stoplight was a checklist. Every turn a thread in the new pattern I was weaving. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't sit and think. I walked straight to my office, logged in, and one by one, I began. The utilities, natural gas, electric, water, those went first. Every single one of them under my name, bundled for convenience, drafted from my account each month because, as Dad had once joked, you know how your mother is with online payments. No more. Access removed. Autopay disabled. Passwords reset. They'd need to contact each provider themselves now, and good luck navigating the customer service labyrinths without the last 4 digits of my social or the answers to security questions they'd never asked. Next, the joint business account, the side project he and I had started when I was fresh out of college, back when I thought building something with my father would bring us closer. I'd done the labor. He'd offered guidance. Profits were small, but steady. He hadn't logged into the back end in months. I locked him out, changed the domain management credentials, redirected the business email. As far as the bank was concerned, I was the sole owner now, and legally I was. I'd paid the filing fees. I'd registered the LLC. He had been a name on the site, nothing more. Then the investment portfolio. A legacy play, he called it. Mutual funds and dividend stocks purchased under a trust we both accessed. Except the contributions had stopped being equal somewhere around year 2. I closed my portion, moved the money to a new brokerage, sent a formal notice to the firm removing his access. If he wanted a legacy, he'd have to build it himself. Sam's phone line, terminated. Aunt Mara's recurring Venmo transfers blocked. The Netflix account, gone. Hulu too, the family calendar I managed, deleted. All the little digital strings that tied us together, the ones I'd woven, tightened, maintained, they snapped in a silent storm of password changes and revoked permissions. I didn't respond to the first text, or the second. The calls started after that, then voicemails. Most from my mother, voice gentle, confused, full of questions she already knew the answers to. Then Sam, who tried to sound furious but came off petulant, like a teenager who'd had his allowance cut. Then Dad. "Son," he said in one of the messages. Just that. One word. That fake affection he rolled out when things cracked. I didn't answer. Instead, I waited until the group thread, the one they only used when they needed something, lit up with chaos. "My card isn't working. Did the water get shut off? Why can't I access the portfolio dashboard?" Each message built on the last, confusion mounting like rising tide water beneath a locked door. That's when I sent the reply. Just 10 words. "Parasite's been removed. Good luck hosting your next holiday." No emojis, no anger, just precision. Truth delivered like a surgical cut. I knew what it would do. The silence after was louder than anything they could have said. I went for a walk then. It was nearly midnight. Cold air, stars overhead like holes poked in black velvet. As I walked past dark houses and sleeping lawns, I didn't feel guilt, didn't feel victory either, just balance. The weight in my chest was gone. They'd call me cruel, ungrateful, dramatic. They'd tell the story differently, cast me as the overreacting son with a grudge. But they'd never tell the part where I was the one who kept the lights on, literally and figuratively. They'd skip over the years I held their lives together behind the scenes. Let them. I wasn't their parasite. I was their infrastructure. And now? They'd have to learn how to survive without me. By Friday morning, their silence had curdled into noise. My phone lit up before sunrise. First, a few desperate messages from Sam, riddled with half-spelled curses and the kind of threats that only sound tough when you're broken-cornered. Then my father, who skipped the pleasantries entirely and went straight for command. Turn it all back on. Enough of this tantrum. That was the word he used. Tantrum. He couldn't even call it what it was. A consequence. I didn't answer. I didn't even open the messages. There was no negotiation happening. They'd spent years treating my help like a faucet. Open when convenient, silent and invisible otherwise. They'd only noticed its presence when the water stopped running. Mid-morning, my cousin Daniel called. I answered, not out of pity, but because Daniel wasn't part of the original disaster. His voice came through scratchy, apologetic. "Hey, man. Listen, I wasn't laughing. I swear. I didn't even get what your dad meant. It caught me off guard." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the spreadsheet I was supposed to be finishing for work. "You didn't laugh," I said, "but you didn't say anything either." He sighed. "You know how it is. I didn't want to make it worse." That was the problem. Nobody ever wanted to make it worse. So instead, they watched it happen, over and over. Jokes about how I didn't have a real family of my own. Little digs about how I owed it to the people who raised me. None of them seemed to care that they'd only raised me halfway, and I'd spent the second half of my life raising them back. "You still using the HBO account?" I asked. There was a pause. "Yeah. I can log out if—" "It's gone," I said, and hung up. I had no interest in punishing people at random, but drawing lines meant reinforcing them. This wasn't about emotional outbursts. It was about structural realignment. I'd propped up a house they'd refused to maintain, and now that I'd walked away, the walls were starting to sag. By noon, my mother called. I didn't answer. The voicemail that followed was calm, measured. Not quite an apology, but not an attack either. "I wish you'd stayed to talk," she said. "Your father. He doesn't always think before he speaks. But you know how he is." Yes, I did. And that was the problem. I didn't need explanations. I needed someone to have stood up in the moment. Someone to say, "That's not okay." Instead, I got a room full of smirks and sideways glances. That afternoon, the first serious fallout started to roll in. The joint business account had been the only stream of steady income for my father since his consulting gigs dried up. I hadn't realized how dependent he'd become on it until the bank called to confirm the removal of his name. They were required to notify him by policy, and he'd evidently called them back in a rage. Then the city utilities department emailed. Apparently the water at the house had already been cut due to an unpaid balance. He hadn't noticed it was behind because the bills had always gone to me, my name, my email, my autopay. Sam messaged that night. Real mature, man, real freaking mature. I ignored it, not because I didn't care, but because there was nothing left to discuss. They'd made me into the villain the moment I stopped bleeding quietly. but not everyone played it the same way. 2 days later, I got an unexpected message from Mara, the aunt whose lights I'd kept on through 6 straight winters. It was long, thoughtful, no apologies, but full of recognition. She told me she hadn't laughed at the table, had felt sick about it actually, that she hadn't known how much I'd been covering until the chaos started. She said she'd started talking to my mother again. Said my father had been blaming me to everyone who'd listen, spinning the story like I'd stolen from the family. That was the moment I realized how deeply he couldn't stand being without control. He wasn't just upset that I'd cut them off. He was furious that I'd done it on my terms, quietly, without spectacle, without permission. So he rewrote the narrative. I was bitter. I was unstable. I was making a scene over one little joke. He started telling people I had financial problems, that I'd needed to pull out of everything, that I'd been hiding some kind of addiction. Anything to shift the spotlight from his public failure to my supposed breakdown. But people weren't buying it. Not all of them anyway. Daniel messaged again, this time with screenshots of the texts Dad had sent the group chat. Angry rants accusing me of manipulating everyone, claiming that I was mentally unwell and needed serious help. It was pathetic, but it also showed just how much he needed to regain the upper hand. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't message the family chat. I didn't post anything. I just kept cutting. Quietly. Cleanly. The car lease that was in my name? Returned. I let the dealer know it wouldn't be renewed. Sam would be walking soon. The storage unit where Dad kept his old tools and files? Access revoked. I paid for it. I'd set it up when he said his garage was too crowded. He'd never even noticed the billing came to my card. Each step was methodical, not fueled by spite, but clarity. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was just done carrying the weight of people who never once said thank you without a condition attached. That weekend, the silence returned, but this time, it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes when everyone's scrambling to patch holes with no tools. I got one last voicemail from my father. Just 30 seconds. I hope you're proud. You've embarrassed your mother, ruined Thanksgiving, thrown a tantrum like a child. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. That was the moment I felt the shift inside me complete. There was nothing left to salvage. No redemption arc. No hidden warmth beneath the scolding. He didn't want reconciliation. He wanted obedience. I went to bed that night with my phone on silent, notifications turned off. No guilt. No second thoughts. Just peace. The next morning, the mail brought a certified letter from my father's lawyer. A threat. He was contesting the removal of his name from the joint account, claiming it had been done without his knowledge or consent. I called my lawyer, sent the documents showing his signature from when we opened the account together, proof of his inactivity, logs of the contributions, all mine. Within 48 hours, the threat was dropped. Desperation was setting in. I started hearing from mutual friends, people I hadn't spoken to in months. Apparently, Dad was spreading stories to anyone who'd listen about how ungrateful I was, how I'd stolen from the family, how I'd always been a burden in disguise. I didn't defend myself, didn't reach out. Every lie he told was another shovel of dirt on the grave he was digging for his credibility. I just lived, ate well, worked, watched a movie, slept deeply. That Monday, the group chat finally fell silent. No more rage texts, no updates, just stillness, the kind that means they're regrouping. Let them. I had nothing left they could drain, and now I could see what it was like to exist outside the machinery of obligation and guilt. I could feel what it meant to say no without flinching, to draw a line and hold it, to dismantle a system that had fed off me while calling me ungrateful for noticing. They could call me cruel. They could call me broken. But they wouldn't call me again to pay their bills. By the 3rd week, the calls stopped, not because they understood, but because they finally realized they couldn't reach me the same way anymore. Not emotionally, not financially, not through guilt. I had severed every direct channel they once used to pull me back into their storm. That vacuum they found themselves in wasn't quiet for me. It was peace. But it wasn't over. Not completely, because I still had to deal with the remaining obligations I'd left behind, the ones tied up in technicalities, documents, and remnants of a family web I'd spent a decade supporting. First came the tax situation. I'd filed our shared investment earnings properly, kept receipts, tracked everything. But my father, in his usual fashion, hadn't filed his end for 2 years. He'd assumed I'd covered it because I always had. That assumption triggered an audit when the IRS flagged the mismatch. They contacted me directly. My name had been on the documents, but all the contributions had come from my account. I provided everything: dates, transfers, bank records. I built a timeline that didn't just separate our finances, it proved he was a ghost in the operation. 2 days later, I got a letter stating I was cleared. Any further inquiries would be directed solely to him. Another weight dropped. Then came the business domain. We had originally launched the project under a co-owned email. It wasn't tied to his name anymore, but old logins still existed in the system. I reached out to the hosting platform, submitted the necessary identity proof, and requested all lingering credentials tied to that email be scrubbed. Within 72 hours, his administrative access was removed permanently. The final lock clicked. Sam attempted one last swing. He filed a complaint on my car insurance claiming I had lied on the policy regarding multiple drivers. He thought he could claw back something through technicality, but I had records showing he wasn't an official driver on the policy. He'd used the car occasionally, but never under my approval or with written agreement. The claim fell apart. At that point, it became obvious they weren't trying to mend anything. They were looking for leverage, anything they could exploit. The gratitude was gone, the history irrelevant. It was about regaining power. I didn't play into it. Instead, I did the final sweep. I sold my share of the old house we had invested in together. A fixer-upper Dad insisted we co-buy after Mom said it might be a good father-son thing. I had paid most of the down payment, handled all the renovations, managed the rental income. He had offered vision and occasional walkthroughs where he criticized paint colors. I listed my share on a real estate marketplace, found a cash buyer within a week, closed without notifying him directly, just a legal notice through the agent. The new buyer would deal with his complaints. I was done. Then I pulled the last file off my desk. The family trust my mother had begged me to help her update 2 years ago. At the time, I thought I was helping preserve something meaningful. Now I saw it for what it was, another structure built on my back without my say. I withdrew my name, sent the notarized amendment through certified mail, official and final. No inheritance, no obligations, no claims. I didn't want the house, didn't want the lake property in Wisconsin. I wanted freedom, and I had it. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside, a handwritten note from my father. It read, "You've made your point, loud and clear, but blood is blood. One day you'll regret this. You'll be alone and no one will be there to help. Not even family. No apology, no acknowledgement, just control disguised as prophecy." I folded the note once, set it in the drawer of my desk, and never opened it again. But not everything went sour. Mara and I started talking more. She apologized again, directly this time. Said she had allowed silence to do too much damage. We met for coffee. Talked like two adults, not like the roles we'd been cast into by obligation. Daniel left the group chat. He texted me the screenshot saying, "I'm done pretending with them. You were right to walk." Even my mother eventually reached out without agenda. No strings. Just an email asking if I'd be open to lunch. Just her, no dad, no hidden setup. We met at a quiet bistro downtown. She looked older than I remembered. Not just aged, drained. She didn't try to fix anything. Just asked how I was, how work was going, whether I was sleeping. We talked for 2 hours. And as we left, she said the one thing I hadn't heard in years. "I'm sorry we let it get this far. It didn't fix everything, but it was something." And me? I moved on. I bought a place, my own name on the deed, no one else involved. A small house, just enough space for me in the quiet. No extra rooms waiting for visitors who'd only come when they needed something. No couches worn out by people crashing without asking. I canceled the old family calendar, deleted the shared grocery list, created new logins for every platform, started rebuilding the life I should have had years ago, one based on choice, not obligation. When the next holiday rolled around, I didn't get an invite, not from Dad, not from Sam, but Mara sent a text. "We're doing something small, just me, Daniel, and a couple friends. No drama, no speeches. If you're free, we'd love to have you." I went. It wasn't loud, There was no carved turkey, no toasts, just real conversations, homemade food, and a quiet understanding of boundaries. And I realized something. Family isn't blood. It's not names on a group thread or shared subscriptions. It's not who laughs at the wrong time or who stands quietly by while you're humiliated. Family is who shows up after, who listens, who owns their silence and then speaks. So no, I didn't regret walking away. Not for 1 second. Because removing myself from their grip wasn't selfish. It was survival.